in a single year. And this is also in the same era of same people who say drain the swamp, and yet they are filling it up with pork at a prodigious rate.
Included in this year's Pig Book is $13 million for the Save America's Treasures grant program, something former President Obama called for the elimination of in his 2011 budget.
When you could get something on the record that President Obama wanted to cut, it's pretty safe to say that you should be able to cut it.
I'm Chris Woodward.
Missouri will no longer be a mecca for men and their child brides. Charlie Butts tells us why.
Missouri Governor Mike Parson has signed into law legislation that establishes a minimum age of 16 for a minor to marry. Joe Ortworth of the Missouri Family Policy Council explains the reasoning for the bill from its legislative sponsors.
Missouri seemed to be becoming a haven for child brides because of the fact that in Missouri a judge could authorize any child under 15 years of age to be issued a marriage license if they so chose.
Ortworth tells AFN several Missouri newspapers were able to document men bringing underage girls into the state, obtaining permission from a judge, and then marriage licenses from recorders, making the state a mecca for child marriages from out of state.
Over a 6-year period, there were like 1,000 or so 15-year-olds married in Missouri, and the data showed a substantial number of those 15-year-olds getting married were being married to individuals 21 or older. You know, some of them were in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s.
The new law also bans issuance of a marriage license for a man or woman 21 years of age or older to any man or woman under the age of 18. The younger person would have to have written consent of a parent to obtain the license. I'm Charlie Butts.
2 kids may have had a run-in with sharks yesterday in New York. Carmen Roberts reports.
Some sort of fish chomped into a 12-year-old girl and a 13-year-old boy playing miles apart in the surf on New York's Fire Island. Lola Polina was in waist-deep water when it happened.
I kind of thought it was a dream. I didn't really think it was actually happening. It was like 3 to 4 feet, so it was pretty big.
Medical workers say it's likely the fish were sharks. They'll know for sure about the boy's attacker when they examine the tooth they removed from his leg. Both kids suffered leg bites but are okay. Carmen Roberts, Fox News.
American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com, on Facebook and Twitter, and download the One News Now mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Coming next week on The Dwelling Place, Pastor Al Pittman continues to walk us through the Bible, line by line and verse by verse, to let God show us just how timeless His truth is. That's next week on The Dwelling Place.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Really, the point was, what's the Democratic Party going to be? I'm still a Democrat. And when I see somebody who really says she's a socialist, she's a very charismatic, captivating candidate. But when you look at the policies, those are not policies that will be supported in very many places across America. And if her win makes her into what Kellyanne Conway called the new face of the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party is not going to have a very bright future.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Thank you so much for being with us today. Jam-packed program. We have 2 guests for you. Stacy on the Right show talkers today are going to be Cassie Smedile, RNC National Press Secretary, and then Phillip Nelson. He's an author. He's coming on in hour 2. I have to say, listening to Joe Lieberman just then, talking about the dangers, the inherent dangers of the Democrats really swinging to the hard left and the inability of them to win national elections with hard left candidates like Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez. He's sounding the alarm bell. I don't know that Democrats are really listening. And by Democrats, I mean the hardcore activist left that has the bully pulpit, and they, funnel the different news stories and perspectives to the media. And they are really, really active on the online social media. And they have really the grip on what the party says, the presentation of the party. So it's interesting that he's coming out and he's being very, very, like he's not holding back. And of course, he caucuses as an independent with the Democrats, but as an independent. And he's run as an independent before because he too was beaten in a primary. And so running as an independent was his way of winning his election. But he's talking about something that's a little more fundamental here. He's talking about the future of the Democratic Party. And I encourage, and we're trying to secure Victor David Hanson as a guest on the program because, in my opinion, right now he's one of the definitive voices on analyzing and giving good analysis on what happened with the Democrats. And when I say what happened, it's a very, very interesting look. If you take the time to really go into it, what happened to the Democrats while President Obama was in office. So he rose to power as, of course, he called himself a community organizer. He ran on a very kind of centrist, moderate, hope and change. You know, he had a great slogan, really, really fantastic presentation when it comes to, you know, marriage and family and all that. And he said he was traditional in those areas. But as he progressed through his first term and then his second term, when he had nothing left, you know, to kind of concern himself with, he could throw off the shackles of convention and things that he felt weren't palatable for his national audience, being the president of the United States. And that's when he swung to the hard left, not just on health care, which was a part of the first term, but on the other parts of his agenda, like same-sex marriage. And he dragged huge constituency groups along with him to the left. Really the hardest leftward turn the Democrats have ever accomplished in this country, all done under the auspices of the presidency of one man, Barack Obama. And so we talked about this a little bit this week. We've delved into it just a hair. What was he doing? Well, he was doing things that only he could do. So in some ways, when he said he wanted a transformative presidency, not only was he not kidding, but he accomplished much of that, because it's not that he drug every Democrat with him, but he significantly changed the face of what Democrats present themselves as. It's as if when you're listening to them now and you compare their rhetoric to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they're unrecognizable. And I'm not talking about comparing some Democrats who are now retired, you know, to what people are saying now. I'm talking about what Hillary Clinton says on a regular basis now, and compare it to what she said when she was Secretary of State, what she said when she was the senator from New York. You see her progress harder and harder to the left. She's racing to keep up with Barack Obama. And before that, she was really more of a kind of common sense Democrat, a neocon, definitely strong on national defense, very, very much, in the vein of, look, we are the international world power. We wield the force of our will, and we bend others to that will. And she really put that forward until Barack Obama came forward. And so they clashed about what to do abroad. And I think a lot of the inactivity that you saw with them on foreign policy, where Barack Obama would say, we're just going to draw a red line, was reflective of the very sharp differences in how America was expected to behave under Hillary Clinton, head of the State Department, as opposed to how Barack Obama saw things going with a reclusive America that shrinks back, America that's constantly apologizing and taking credit for ills around the world without taking any of the credit for the good things that we do around the world and the stability that our power engenders around the world. And so she and he did not have the same direction in mind. And their fighting about it, their disagreements on it, basically pulled the entire apparatus to a screeching halt. Yeah, we did just tons and tons of drone attacks, but that didn't yield intel for us. A lot of the things that we were doing around the world before President Obama came in were brought to a halt and changed under his direction, not because Hillary Clinton agreed, but because she was powerless to stop him. But she did disagree. But on the social issues, the Black community, largely conservative. I mean, I'm talking on the social issues. So Black people don't think that abortion is a fantastic thing and that everybody should have one and you should shout your abortion and you should be proud of it. blacks, especially church-going blacks, the largest segment of the American populace when it comes to percentage, who regularly attend church and believe that the Bible is the Word of God and pray, actively pray and expect answered prayer from their Father in heaven and Jesus Christ, the black community. The Barna Group surveys and studies have been tracking religion in American life for decades, and they've always shown blacks to be the largest group. Not only is black church attendance down, but those ideas of social conservatism that really don't show up much in the voter booth, but were still a bedrock belief in the black community, those have changed. And so the reflection of that is we see a lot of things that used to be frowned upon that were burgeoning in the black community and really kind of creeping out into the larger society group. Those things were at least negative in the opinion of the black community. Out of wedlock births, fatherlessness, incarceration, drug use. These were all frowned upon, and especially the homosexual lifestyle. Now it's as if people are saying, well, Barack Obama accepted it, and, he was the first black president. And so if it's all right by him, it's all right by me. Now that's younger generations, of course, millennials, people, in the younger age group, and people who are on that crux, people in their 40s and their 50s, are still largely conservative in their beliefs, but they don't feel like they have a home. They don't want to go to the Republicans, who've been largely painted as racist, incorrectly, obviously incorrectly, but they also don't feel comfortable in the Democrats anymore. And so this is all due to the presidency of Barack Obama. While he was doing all of these things on the social issues and the social side and really changing norms in America, transforming the norms, he was also in pushing these radical ideas and changing and evolving on different things. He was causing people who had, electoral mobility, people who are really, really motivated to get out and vote in the special elections in the spring and the midterm elections in November and the primaries in August and June and July, all those little elections where only the hardcore voters pay attention when they get their little card in the mail. And they're like, oh, election coming up, and they make sure and go to it and vote. Those people said, we can't have this radical change in American life. And so they elected Republicans. And so 1,100 seats lost across the country. Untold state legislatures flipped to Republicans because they were trying to combat what they saw as a rogue influence in the White House, trying to subvert American culture and radically change the norms. So now you have all of this happen under President Obama. You have Donald Trump come onto the scene. He's coming in. His intention is he's the haymaker. He's coming in to wreck stuff. He's here to burn it to the ground. And that should be something that's anathema to traditionalists who don't like change, who don't like radical anything. That's conservative Republicans, people who just want to see government shrink so that they can be left alone to live out their freedom and liberty under the Constitution. But a lot of those people felt like previous Republicans talked a good game, raised a lot of money, went to Washington, D.C. and bought the fancy clothes and the second home and started being driven around by staff and forgot where they came from and never delivered on the promises that were made. And so in a very odd twist, the very things that made Barack Obama so palatable to the left, his smooth oratory capability, his professor-like demeanor because he was a college professor, and the way he used to adopt different forms of speech. Like every time he said Pakistan, I would just, it's like a verbal tick. He'd say Pakistan. And it was just also romantic for the Democrats. That same aura that he projected, that the Democrats adored, the elitism, was repugnant to tens of millions of working class Americans who were formerly Democrats and Republicans who were sick of suits telling them what to do. So now you have Donald Trump, biggest upset, in my opinion. He was 98% to lose. The odds were definitely not in his favor. But then you see it's also because Hillary Clinton adopted what should have been a winning strategy for her, which was demagoguing Donald Trump as a racist, painting the Republicans as racist, using the playbook of Barack Obama. But it's a unique playbook that it just can't be replicated. And it's never going to work for another Democrat again. The way it worked for him, it's not going to work. So a new strategy needs to be employed. Well, for millennials and young people who are seeing, they want someone radical and transformative, as we see with Donald Trump on the right. They want someone like that for themselves. And so they're turning to these little kind of empty-headed socialists like Ocasio-Cortez, someone who can't explain her foreign policy. She says it's not something we discussed around the kitchen table. If you're running for Congress, we don't care what you talked about around the kitchen table. We want to know what you've researched and what you know. What do you think about the Palestinians amassing Hamas on the border of Israel and Israel fighting back to prevent an incursion? Why do you think that is a massacre? Why is that not a military engagement that occurred that Israel won? It was their border. They had every right to defend it. If people amassed troops along any border in the United States, if Canadians suddenly stood up, a few thousand troops along our border with them, our northern border, what do you think we would do? Well, I think they'd probably make a few red phone, conversations, what have you. The two world leaders would talk. But if the leader of Canada wasn't really willing to chat, we wouldn't just sit there and observe as Canadians storm the border of the United States. We would scramble jets and we'd rain down missiles from on high. That's what you do when military amasses at your border. You surface to air missiles. I mean, we have a bevy of options. There would not be troops from some other country amassing along our border and no response from our U.S. military. And if you don't believe that, look at what we're doing over in Syria, because apparently President Trump just adores Vladimir Putin. But meanwhile, he has General Mattis actually slaughtering Russian mercenaries, Russian troops. They're not a part of their traditional military. They're Russian mercenaries, some of them privately funded, but obviously mostly funded by the Russian government. And we're killing them by the hundreds. Our guys are over there killing these guys by the hundreds. So much so, we've killed so many of them that a few pansy, limp-wristed Democrats, women in Congress, have called General Mattis on the carpet. We played the audio right here on the show where he sat there with a stone-cold demeanor and explained that according to our rules of engagement, those troops that are not designated and operating under the flag of one of our allies or someone that we have a military operational agreement with will be utterly destroyed. And when she said, well, why can't we? He said, under military operational rules of engagement, that's what we do. She doesn't even understand that. And this is who the Democrats are now calling the face of their party. This is who they say is supposed to win national elections. It can't be done, especially when you have people like Lieberman, who's actually pretty moderate and normal and reasonable, saying the same thing. All right, when we get back, we'll have Cassie Smedile, RNC National Press Secretary, right here on Stacy on the Right. Call in at 866-963-2037. We'll be right back.
Len Ingram of Redeem Clean felt God call him to support the American Family Association.
I'm a laundryman. I'm the son of a laundryman, too. I love clean clothes. I love the business. I love everything about it. This project was built exclusively to support AFA and AFR. There's no strings attached. Another thing that I would like to see come out of this is that I would like to see other business people feel a calling to support ministries wherever and whatever they do to share the gospel of Jesus Christ.
In addition to your regular AFA giving, Redeem Clean Laundry Detergent allows you to increase your support of AFA just by continuing to wash your family's clothes. For clean laundry and support of a cleaner society, it's Redeem Clean. Learn more, find options, and get Redeem Clean products at afastore.net. That's afastore.net.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a legacy moment. Some years ago, we were discussing some ways in which we could help our younger staff members in their personal development. Someone suggested that we could teach them how God works. I asked, what do you mean by that? The person suggesting it replied, you know, Crawford, the pattern he uses to lead us and direct us. My response was that, aside from the objective statements of Scripture, I'm not so sure there is a pattern. The way God leads you may be different from how he leads me, And the way he worked in my life 5 years ago might not be the same today. Now, God uses his word to direct our lives. That is rock solid truth, and I'm not talking about any leading or direction in our lives apart from that. Listen to 1 Chronicles chapter 14, verses 10 and 14. And David inquired of God, saying, Shall I go up against the Philistines, and will you give them into my hand? Then the Lord said to him, Go up, for I will give them into your hand. Now verse 14, another situation very similar to the former one. God said to him, You shall not go up after them, but circle around behind them. And it shall be when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then you shall go out to battle. Same situations, even the same question, but God responded differently. We should seek God, but not make assumptions. Remember, God may want to reveal to you something different and more of himself, even though the circumstances might be the same. Here's what I want you to remember and do today. Don't try to control or predict God. We're called to a life of dependence. Embrace the mystery of the journey, and you'll be surprised what you discover.
Crawford Loritz is senior pastor of Fellowship Bible Church in suburban Atlanta, Georgia. For more information, go to livingalegacy.org. livingalegacy.org.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thanks for sharing us online social media and hitting the like button and the subscribe button and all that good stuff. AFR.net and urbanfamilytalk.com are our websites where you can find out more. Thank you for being here today. It's my pleasure to welcome frequent guest in the program and RNC National Press Secretary Cassie Smedile. Cassie, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, Stacy, great to be with you.
It's great to talk to you. I've been like between moments on this whole, let's abolish ICE. Let's get rid of it. And I think what's happened is that they've painted themselves into a corner, and now they have nowhere to go.
Yeah. That's exactly. Once again, the Democrats have overplayed their hand, which is becoming, this is the true theme of their election. Let's overplay our hand. Let's go as apocalyptic and apoplectic as possible on every issue possible. And here, once again, you're right, they're painted into a corner. And I just love that the House of Representatives put that bill on the floor to say, well, first put the abolish ICE bill on the floor, and then they ended up with the vote last week, or earlier this week, rather, to show your support for ICE. And the Democrat Party is so polarized, and they're under so much pressure to be as progressive and extreme as possible that they couldn't even vote in support of ICE. It's just really something.
So there are two parts there to what you're sharing. The first one is that they brought, it wasn't Republicans. It's not a trick, even though they're saying it's a dirty trick. It's not a trick at all. They actually had 3 of their legislators bring forward a bill to abolish ICE. And so, you've got Paul Ryan, and he's like, well, okay, if that's what you guys want to do, I see you've submitted a bill here. Let's bring it to a vote, because that's what they do. That's when you bring a bill forward, it's usually because you want people to vote on it. So when he said that, they said, well, you're playing dirty tricks in politics with us because we're not ready to vote on that right now. And so the 3 of them said, well, we're going to vote no if you bring it forward. And he was like, well, it's your bill. So, if you don't want it to be brought forward, you shouldn't have submitted it. So then the Republicans saw an opening there. Hey, let's tell the American people that we, their elected representatives, support ICE, which is something that, oddly enough, Republicans are usually for eliminating agencies and getting rid of certain, duplications and stuff. So it was kind of interesting to see them coming out in support of a government agency. But when you look at what they do, stopping drug trafficking, arresting MS-13 who, are beheading our children and running them down in the streets and raping young women and babies. You kind of feel like this is an agency we could probably get behind and support. So I thought it was a brilliant move on their part to just say, let's everybody raise their hand if you support ICE, and everyone else who doesn't, we're all going to look at you and shake our heads. And yeah.
And we're going to make sure your constituents know where you stand, because a lot of these guys, although they themselves are extreme in their viewpoints, their constituencies, or at least the majority of them, aren't necessarily this extreme in their viewpoints. And so I'm with you. I loved the Republicans took advantage of this moment to put the spotlight on them and expose them for what they are.
So what's next? Because obviously ICE is not going to be abolished, but we still have this situation at the border where we're basically back to catch and release. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that I think it keeps people up at night. I think it's a concern, like that we have 56,000 illegal immigrant children who have been left here or sent here by their families from South America, and they're in the country. And it's not so much that we're afraid of these children, but they have to be taken care of. And we already have 500,000 children in foster care who are actual American kids who need families and homes and et cetera. So this is a crazy situation.
Right. And I think so the conversation continues that we need to fix our immigration system, and we do need reform. And Republicans continue to be on the right side of the conversation insofar as agreeing that our laws that are currently on the books are not working or are broken and we need to fix them. And while we do have compassion for these children who came here through no fault of their own, it's not fair to those who did come here and go through the legal channels and to Americans. And so conversely, that you've got Democrats who continue to put the priorities and the interests of illegal immigrants over American citizens and those who came through the process legally. That's a real issue for them at the ballot box this November. And certainly I can't speak to what's next on the agenda over in Congress, but from the RNC perspective, we want voters to know what their representatives are doing or not doing or advocating for or not advocating for. We know this is a big deal. We can all agree that we need to fix our immigration system, and Congress should work on that. But this whole business of putting the priorities of illegal immigrants over American citizens, to your point, that is what keeps us up at night. And that's something that we need to get people in Congress who don't have inverse priorities like that.
Yeah. So latest news out of California, I believe it's San Francisco, they're registering illegal aliens to vote. In Illinois, they're having city council meetings where they're discussing why people who are here legally but are not American citizens, why they're paying taxes but aren't allowed to vote. I mean, these are radical changes that are being proposed by so-called Democrats. I mean, I'm actually, as someone who I oppose the Democrats at every turn, I'm wondering if these are actual Democrats who are proposing these things, because Democrats are not actually socialists. If you're a true Democrat, you're not a Republican, but you're also not a socialist. So it's a weird position to be in where I'm questioning if the people who are making these proposals are actually Democrats. How do we get that out there before the voters so everyone knows, look, what's coming down the pipeline is they're going to suggest that people who are here illegally and those who are here legally but are not citizens have the same rights that you have?
Well, and I think, so here's a couple of things that are happening that fly in the face of the national narrative, which, we know so many in the mainstream media are trying to make it true that we should be out there for these illegals, that we should all be pro-sanctuary cities and all of that. But that's not the reality on the ground. I'll give you a great example. So in Florida, where current Governor Rick Scott, of course, he's running for Senate, actually has incredible approval among Hispanics. And one of the reasons why, and we have this system, we have this program that we work with the governor on, is because we have folks from the community, in the community, who work with us and with the governor's office to welcome these new folks to Florida. So we work a lot with Puerto Ricans who are coming to the mainland, but also people who have immigrated here legally. And we call them bienvenidos meetings. And it's like think of it kind of like a job fair. You go in and there's representatives from the local chamber of commerce and from the school districts and all the churches, and to show you this is your new community and this is how you can get assimilated and get involved. And yes, you have voter registration as well, but it's first and foremost for the community. And from that perspective, people are saying, I have a great relationship with the Republican Party. These people actually are trying to help me get set up to achieve my American dream. They think I can bring value to their country, and that's why I came here. Far different narrative than the Democrats of these hyper-progressive areas like San Francisco and, as you mentioned, Chicago and Illinois, who are saying, we want to skirt around the laws and the rules and get people to come and make, force you or allow you to be a voter. I think that's outside of, first of all, where the Hispanic community is generally, those who came here legally. They're happy they're very proud of their citizenship. They're proud of the process they went through, and that was a hard-fought process. They don't have sympathy for those who are cutting the line and getting special favors. So that's one thing that we're seeing. And secondly, when you get right down to it, they're seeing that the Republican Party is the party that much more closely aligns with their values and their vision for their own American dreams, that pride of work. And so I think on the ground and in these communities, that's the benefit of our infrastructure at the Republican Party, but you're seeing this much more positive engagement, and it flies in the face of the national narrative that there is this move towards sanctuary cities and making loopholes for immigrants.
Thank you for sharing that, because that gives me a lot of hope that we are doing the things that because I'm not against immigration. I'm absolutely, like, I think it's wonderful when people decide they want to be Americans and then they go through the process. Our process is so onerous that if you make it all the way through, you really do want to be an American, because you've paid a lot, you've waited a long time, you've had to go through a lot of hoops. And so when you finally cross that line, I feel like those people are the ones that you meet that are they're pro-America, and they don't have to be political to be pro-America. That's actually, it's such a great place to be, because they're not really worried about left or right politics. They're just saying what's best for the country. And they make great Americans. Like this is the way it's supposed to be. And so knowing about that, we need more of that. We need more opportunities to show people that, yes, we welcome immigrants who are here lawfully, and we're happy that they're in our communities and that they're taking part in American life. And, you know, that goes against what people are saying about Republicans. That's absolutely the opposite of what we're usually demagogued as. So I think it's wonderful. Right. So I guess I want to close out and give you the last word by kind of touching on, we're moving away now from the hysteria that has kind of dominated the news cycle for the past 4 days about President Trump's comments in Helsinki. And I've been characterizing it as, you know, it's obvious that when he came out after the 2-hour meeting, it was not the presentation that I'm used to seeing from President Trump, but we all have our good days and our bad days, our off days, what have you. In the scheme of things, what he's doing is what I'm most concerned with. And he has been very, very tough on Russia since he's become the president of the United States, much more so. His record for his short presidency thus far is so much more brutal towards Russia than anything President Obama did while he was in office. How do we go forward with, it's kind of like the Mueller investigation is on, you know, limping legs. It's like it's been hobbled, but it's still there. And I was expecting it to kind of be wrapping up, and maybe it still will by August, so that it doesn't impact the midterms. But what are you thinking or seeing about the Mueller investigation and you know, going forward, especially since we have the campaign season heating up?
Right. Well, of course, I'm of the mindset that I think for all the reasons you described, we need to wrap this up as quickly as possible. We've spent a lot of taxpayer dollars on this, and it seems that it's not turned up anything that at least not like they thought it would turn up, and at least against the president. But here's what I know for sure. There was a poll out today that said the overwhelming majority of Americans, basically, it doesn't matter what the Mueller investigation finds, the overwhelming majority of Republicans, that's not going to impact their vote or opinion of the president. And I think part of that is the conversation we've been having so much of. The Democrats have overplayed their hands. It's the noise and the chatter of this has been, it's just volume 12. So people are saying, I don't even know what's going on anymore. It's hard to keep track. I don't know what this finding actually means. So people just want to see it wrapped up and make your decision. Let us know your findings, and we'll go on from there. But this just in perpetuity investigation is not okay. It's not healthy for the country. It's not healthy for the presidency. And we need to know where we're going from here. But I'm at our RNC summer meeting here right now, actually, in Texas, and I was talking to some of our members. Of course, we have 3 committee members from each state. I said, what does this sound like back home? What are you hearing? And one of our committee men this morning put it in a way I just really like it. He said, I got to tell you what, the number 1, 2, and 3 most important issue is the economy. And when you got people who are saying, I was so used to seeing going out of business signs, and now I'm seeing we're hiring or we're expanding or opening soon, that's what matters to me. So, yes, we want to make sure that other countries are not meddling in our democracy. I think that's a very important cause, of course. But to think that this issue is going to supersede the almighty issue of, are you better off now than you were 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 8 years ago? The economy, our communities, and are we safer? Are our children living productive lives? That's always going to be the number one issue. And I don't think anything we can hear on CNN all day long about the Mueller investigation will change that.
Perfectly put. I think it's good for us to keep that. And it's for Republicans, we couldn't be happier with the performance of the president right now. And that's warts and all. For real people, we understand that just because Obama was such a fantastic communicator and he rarely flubbed in public, which is actually kind of a misnomer too. He flubbed quite a bit, but they just didn't make a big deal out of it. Doesn't mean he did things that were great for Americans. Meanwhile, you have Donald Trump, who is clearly not trained up in the school of politics 101, speaking 102 and 220 and all that, but he is a master at dressing down his enemies and keeping his promises. Much more important to us than whether or not he had his best day when he was standing on a podium, next to this horrible, brutal former head of the KGB. It's almost like, what do you do when you're standing next to someone who's as repugnant can get? Well, I don't know. Probably not pick a fight with him. No one is sure exactly what he was supposed to do. But I think, the further
close and your enemies closer, right?
Just be nice, because you're probably not going to get anywhere with this guy. And that has to be a reality that we accept. I agree with you 100%. We should focus on what we can impact, and voting in November is very important. I encourage people to get informed and don't forget to vote. Just the primaries, obviously, still rolling across the country. August is a great month for those, especially here in Missouri. And then also going forward in November. We just have to be determined that we're going to show up and vote, and that will make a huge difference. Cassie, thank you so much for joining us today. Cassie Smedile, RNC National Press Secretary. Awesome to talk to you today.
Always great to be with you. Thanks so much, Stacy.
All right. Talk again soon. Enjoy the conference. We are going to be moving through the program. I saw a comment from someone saying, what do we do when dealing with people who are saying, wake up, and people who are suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, who are in our circles, people who are close to us, who we care for these people, but they are adamantly opposed to President Trump. I'm going to share something about that. We'll talk about that a little bit when we get back. I have some audio for you, so we'll get to that as well. But I'll take some time to discuss what we can do from the biblical perspective when dealing with conflict. And I think it's a great question and a great time to discuss it right now. And so keep it here. Call lines are open at 866-963-2037. And you can find out more at stacyontheright.com. And just exciting to be having time with you today on a Thursday on the show. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Uncommon Moments. Here's former Super Bowl winning NFL coach Tony Dungy and his wife Lauren sharing from their book Uncommon Marriage.
Marriage is like playing football. From the opening kickoff, you start off with adrenaline, but by the end of the game, you're exhausted.
Marriage is the same way. You begin your first few years of life together with excitement. Then, years later, you realize you don't have enough adrenaline to keep your marriage at that intense level that you first began with.
Marriages go through stages. What's important is to let your spouse know that you are committed to them for life and that you love them more than anyone else in the world.
You should also lean on Philippians 4, 6, and 7. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything and tell God your needs.
Tony and Lauren Dungy, authors of Uncommon Marriage, learning about lasting love and overcoming life's obstacles together. Discover more at CoachDungy.com.
It's time to call your senators. We need to tell them to put an end to the liberals' filibuster, switch to a majority vote, and defund Planned Parenthood. Call the Capitol Switchboard at 202-224-3121 or go to afaaction.net. Senators respond to constituent calls. So call 202-224-3121 and tell your senators to switch to a majority vote and defund Planned Parenthood. Your call will make a difference.
Where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. But blessed is he who keeps the law. Our country is suffering because of lack of leadership, division, and a disdain for godliness. Urban Family Talk exists to be a prophetic voice as we speak on matters of religion, family, and culture. We will not be silent on issues plaguing our communities today as we sound the alarm of truth, wisdom, and empowerment. Join the movement at urbanfamilytalk.com.
This is Just a Minute with Stacy Washington. The crisis at our southern border has stymied all reasoning and thoughtful consideration of what is driving the influx of people irresponsibly dragging tiny children thousands of miles to break our border laws. Most of those arriving here illegally are claiming credible fear that they will suffer violence or reprisals in their home country. The problem with that is that just 5% of all claims made are found to meet our standards for asylum. This doesn't matter because those who are caught at the border are released into America, and 95% of them never show for their asylum hearing. The result is a marked increase in people competing for low-wage work, which disenfranchises our low-income citizens and is burdening our welfare system. Central American migrants claiming asylum have surged 800% over numbers recorded in 2012. Violence in Central America has declined by 40%. It's time that we made it clear we are closed to illegal entry into our country. I'm Stacy Washington. Find out more at stacyontheright.com.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Yeah, Sean, look, I think I warned them not just in 2014, but very specifically in 2016, where I called it the largest intelligence failure since 9/11, our failure to understand Putin's plans and intentions. And remember, by that time, we had seen the Russians actively involved in many elections around the globe. So they were actively trying to interfere in elections in Eastern Europe and some of the former Soviet states. So this was nothing new at all. And what I'm most upset about in this whole situation of many things, but when you go back to that time period, is how they were able to ignore the warnings that we were sending from the House Intelligence Committee. And then, lo and behold, after they lost the election, they first tried to blame fake news. And then when that didn't work, they switched it into this whole concept of Russia.
So that's Devin Nunes. He's actually discussing with Sean Hannity, the FBI and DOJ leaders trying to wait out the Republican Congress because right now there's nothing to show for the Mueller investigation. And by the way, welcome back to the program. Thanks for being here today. StacyOnTheRight.com for more. Devin Nunes is explaining how he's seen the deep state do this. They're already there. And again, deep state doesn't mean every member of the government, every member of these agencies is against Donald Trump or operating in this way. It's the people who are in leadership who we now know have operated in this way and those who are supporting them. And that's a significant number of people. Obviously, because of what we've seen with the Lisa Page, Peter Strzok text messages, the proliferation of that whole attitude on the people who are now working on the Mueller investigation, some of them, they've only donated to Democrats their entire careers in public service, and others. And so he's explaining what we now know to be a phenomenon. And it's crazy. It's just crazy that this even has to be a discussion, because when you sign on to work for the federal government, you are agreeing that you're going to work under whichever commander-in-chief is there. If you're a career appointee, you are someone who works there all the time. You work whether Republicans are in charge or if Democrats are in charge. If an independent were to suddenly be in charge, you'd still be working there. And the minute you feel like you can't work under that administration, it's not your job to stop it. It's your job to leave. You submit your resignation and move on into private life, leave that agency and go to one that's less politically charged, whatever. You have, the sky's the limit. All options are open to you. So what is he saying? They're banking on Democrats dropping the investigation. Well, if they can't get an impeachment out of it, it's really embarrassing right now. Like chatting with Cassie just a moment ago, it's kind of evident that if there were collusion, and remember, many of the people on Capitol Hill who have security clearance have already seen the majority of the evidence that is being generated in the Mueller investigation. So if there were any collusion that were being proven, that would have leaked out, right? Republicans would be seeking a way to quietly usher in a Mike Pence presidency or do something that wouldn't involve a lengthy impeachment that would cripple their agenda. We're not seeing any of that. So we kind of have, an inkling that this is not what we were told it was going to be. Now, he goes on to say that every time there's any news, like any news at all, like President Trump's going to, he's going to NATO. And then when he leaves NATO, he's going to England and he's going to hang out with the Queen for a little bit, review the troops, let Melania walk across the cobblestone courtyard looking like a queen. And then they're going to jump on Air Force One and zip on over to Helsinki, where they're going to meet with Putin. And so all of a sudden, this indictment that could have been made literally 6 months ago, basically any time before last Friday, they decide to make it last Friday because that's how they could dominate the news cycle and set the president up to go into this meeting with Putin instead of it being conciliatory and them agreeing on something. They got to go into it with this investigation hanging over their heads. So here Nunez is talking a little bit more about this. It's number 5.
And remember, so it's not just about the warnings that I gave in 2014, 15, and 16. It is also a fact that a year and a half ago, the House Intelligence Committee had more than what's in the Mueller indictment of the 12 Russian officers. Okay, so we had more information than that. Now, and we put it in our report in March. It was in our report that was made public in April. It's heavily redacted, remember, by the Department of Justice and FBI. But we had all this information. And so, the thing that I brought up is I just find the timing of this to be very hard to believe, right? Yeah. You might give them the benefit of the doubt, but why does this always happen? Every time something happens on one side where we find out a new revelation about what appears to be real problems in the FBI and DOJ with this investigation, then all of a sudden they drop an indictment. It's happened time and time and again, and this one is really bad.
And it is. It's really bad. It's bad because it shows animus from the Mueller investigation against their target. They're investigating Donald Trump. Remember, the investigation is supposed to be impartial. Yes, a prosecutor wants to get the person they think did the crime, but a prosecutor also has to be willing to accept that perhaps the evidence that they're presenting doesn't support that person being prosecuted. A person who can every target is guilty, no matter what the evidence shows, that's not a prosecutor. That's a witch hunt. And so anything that even sniffs of bias and a desire to take someone down, regardless of what the evidence says, is going to smack of a witch hunt. And it's going to be something that's frowned upon by anyone who cares about. Remember, if you're supporting the taking down of someone who is innocent just because you don't like them, gird your loins. Prepare for that same thing to be visited upon you 100-fold. If you think someone that you don't like deserves to be taken down just because you don't like them, instead of thinking, I don't like that person, I don't like their politics, but if they're innocent, they deserve to go free, then you got a whole lot of stuff coming down the pipeline your way. You got boulders rolling downhill on you that you meant to roll on the other person. Quick, address that. You don't want the boulder rolling back on you. Get yourself right. And that's what we're seeing here. People are so ginned up and excited and almost salivating. They're bloodthirsty for this takedown. Look at the New Yorker magazine shows President Trump face planting at the bottom of an escalator in Trump Tower with his thumbs up. It's obvious that he's dead. That's the political discourse right now. The president dead, the president beheaded, the president assassinated. That's what people are not just seeing from leadership and media, but they're eating it up. They're excited by it. They want it. That gets their blood pumping. That's wrong. That's wrong. So here's the last little bit from Nunez. He's talking about the GOP losses, prospective losses in Congress, and how that plays into the hands of the Democrats, and that's what many of these these are career appointees. In other words, they stay there until they want to retire. They don't have an expiration date on their work, their contract. And they're a part of what Donald Trump calls the swamp that he ran on draining. They're also a part of the apparatus of the Democrats that wants to see the end of the Trump presidency. And the way that they go about doing that is to get the impeachment. But if they can't get the impeachment, they wait, and hopefully the Democrats take control of Congress and they would order the shutdown of the investigation so that the American people would never have to actually be told in unequivocal terms, look, there wasn't anything. He's innocent. So shutting down the investigation leaves the cloud of the possibility of him being guilty out there in perpetuity, crippling his presidency, which would be better for them than simply saying, look, we thought he was guilty. He wasn't guilty. The Russians definitely hacked. They definitely meddled, but they didn't do so with the help of Donald Trump or really his campaign. It was just these things happened. Because then you know what happens. If it's not the Russians and Trump working together to steal the election, then they have to just admit that they ran a bad candidate. She ran a bad campaign. She was arrogant. She was very much into herself and didn't think she could lose. And, you know, bim, bam, boom, they lost. No, there's no way they're wanting that. So here he is, number 6, talking about that a little bit.
It's the oldest trick in the book. So many of the bureaucracies here in Washington know how to wait out Congress. They know to try to plan meetings on a Friday when they know there's not votes, or on a Monday when there's not votes. That's the time that they want to give things. They wait. They know that Congress is going to adjourn next week, and so the more that they delay for no reason, we're waiting on many documents, as you know. We're getting very slow, snail-paced cooperation that is clearly designed to wait until next week when Congress adjourns. Now, I have news for them. They're still going to get to come in and give depositions. They may think they're not going to, but they're going to be coming in to give depositions throughout the summer, and that's part of the 42 names that I sent to Chairman Gowdy and Chairman Goodlatte. So I have every expectation that there will be many opportunities for these 42 individuals to come to Congress, even though they have tried to wait us out. And I think they'd love to see Republicans lose. And I say that, I hate to say that, but I have to believe that the Department of Justice and FBI, the people at the leadership, they are banking on a loss by the Republicans in the fall, which is why people have to understand how important it's going to be to get out and vote in this election to ensure that the members of Congress are returned that are actively involved to ensure, because if the Democrats get control, they're going to drop all of this investigation. They're not going to do anything on this investigation.
They'll cover up.
And so that's just another perspective on what all of us know in our gut, which is, so I want to see people who've broken or subverted our laws, or anyone who committed treason. I would want to see that person brought to justice, regardless of their political party or religious affiliation. I would want them to be brought to justice. So this isn't a case of when people are talking and they're saying, you need to wake up, he's a traitor. When you're deceived, you're going to see normal actions. Your paranoia is going to set in. It's going to look like that person's a traitor. And that's a great way to segue into this next. I want to answer this question in the last moments of this segment, which was posed on one of the streams. Someone said, family members are saying, wake up, wake up. This is a tough place. Full disclosure, I've talked about this on the show a few times. I have immediate family that I love that are completely and diametrically opposed to me politically. And it has been a really rough road to travel, because it used to be that you could disagree with someone politically. You could still go to lunch with them. You could still be in close communication with them. You could, do your hobbies together, like scrapbooking. Your kids could play together. And it was just something that you knew, they're right-sided. Oh, they're left-sided. That's it. It was easy. And it was kind of like a little bit of an elephant in the room. It was almost as if you took a little bit of joy in knowing, I'm friends with this person and we disagree on this issue, but we're friends. Our friendship transcends that. And so you took care to kind of avoid bickering about these topics, because you knew in the end of things, you're not going to change their mind and they're not going to change your mind. And so it was a happy place of, we just know this about each other, but we like each other. That place doesn't seem to exist anymore. And I'm just speaking from my own experience and that of a lot of our close friends who happen to be right-sided. There just isn't any room for people to be good friends and spend lots of time with each other if they're not in the same place politically. That's not biblical. So let's talk about this a little bit. And I thank I can't remember who it was that typed it in, but thank you for the question. It's a great subject for us to discuss. And perhaps we'll have to have a whole segment on it to go into it more in depth, but I did want to touch on it today, seeing the question in there, because this is one of those weeks where a lot of terms were thrown around against the president, and then those are smears that they then continue on down and also dirty and sully up people who support the president. Well, he's a traitor. He's a Putin lover. So are you. That's the kind of rhetoric that gets us into a dangerous place where we start arguing and we say things, and then, friendships are destroyed, relationships are damaged. So first of all, The first thing we have to remember as Christians when we're dealing with any subject, but politics especially, because politics is that bonfire right now in our political discourse, in our national discourse that is destroying relationships, is that as followers of Christ, we are called to love and serve our neighbors. Matthew 28:19 through 20. That's the reference verse on that. When asked about the qualification of a neighbor, Jesus told a parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10:25 through 37, which tells us as Christians that our neighbors, this is not only blacks are my neighbors, only, people who are in the same income group as me are my neighbors. No, social status, occupation, racial background, ethnic background, whatever it is, our neighbor is to be loved by us the way Christ called us to, which is to love our neighbors. So we don't get to pick and choose who the neighbors are. They are our neighbors. It's the people that we interact with. So one of the most important areas in which we can demonstrate Christian love is to our neighbors in the area of politics, because it is so incendiary. We need to engage in the political arena because it impacts so much of how we as a nation care for the hungry, thirsty, naked, lonely, the travelers in our land, which are the legal immigrants, and the illegal immigrants. How are we to treat all of these people? The Bible says, Jesus said, as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. Now, that is not an okay or a green light for us to destroy our border and, illegal immigration, yeehaw. That's not what that means. Now, loving our neighbor and caring for the least of these should be a priority for every one of us. And it means volunteering and influencing laws that encourage human flourishing. Good government and laws are not negligible factors here. So good government, smaller government that's not totalitarian, telling you what pronouns you have to use and what bathroom you can use, that is not what God calls us to do. He calls us to speak the truth in love and to be wise. And the only way to be wise is to be informed. And we have to keep politics in its proportion. If you know you can't discuss politics with a relative, simply say to that person, I love you and I want to maintain our relationship, and therefore I will not discuss politics with you. Not because I don't think we can discuss it, but because every conversation results in damaged feelings and jeopardizes the relationship. And you can do that. And if you decide to do that, it gets you closer to loving your neighbor. We'll touch on this again, but right now we're up for onenewsnow.com news and information and the break. We'll be right back after this.
Urban Family Talk.
AFA Action Alerts. When you subscribe, we'll notify you once or twice a week about a critical issue facing our country. AFA Action Alerts have been very successful in influencing legislation, as well as getting positive results from America's Fortune 500 companies. Subscribe to your AFA Action Alerts today. Go to afa.net and click on the Resources tab.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
For American Family News on the Hour, I'm Chris Woodward. An explosion at a Pennsylvania Army installation that injured several workers this morning remains under investigation. Fox's Gernal Scott continues our coverage.
Some of the employees at the Letterkenny Army Depot were treated for burns and other injuries, which aren't believed to be serious. The facility does work with missile ground support and Patriot missile recertification, but Depot Commander Stephen Ledbetter says they don't believe the explosion was intentionally set.
We do not suspect any type of terrorist activity at this time.
The explosion was limited to a single area of the depot and has not shut down the facility entirely. Ledbetter says all of the workers have been accounted for. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has called for the first ever ministerial to advance religious freedom, which will take place next week. The three-day event in D.C. will bring together government officials, representatives of international organizations, religious leaders, rights advocates, and members of civil society organizations from around the world. In an interview airing later today on Washington Watch with Tony Perkins, Secretary Pompeo says he expects this to be far more than just talk.
We do believe that just putting people together from all across the world in a room and talking about this topic will empower them to go back to their home country and advocate for religious freedom as well. It's difficult, Tony, as you know, in many countries to even speak about religious freedom. And so we hope to provide a support system and a basis for some of them to head back to their own countries. But we'll announce a number of initiatives.
Vice President Mike Pence will be speaking at the ministerial, as well as U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback. New prices could bring prescription drug prices down, according to Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar.
We're creating the legislative and regulatory structures that make sense, that they will bring their prices down, and they're skating to where the puck will be, as Gretzky would say. So we applaud them for doing that. But their voluntary actions are not what we're counting on. We're driving swift, firm regulatory action, legislative action that's going to create every incentive to bring prices down in this country.
You don't often hear a hockey analogy in healthcare stories. Secretary Azar says the Trump administration is looking into allowing imported drugs from other countries into the U.S. in an effort to bring costs lower overall. But the idea is controversial, and many critics say the medication needs to meet U.S. safety standards. The man who became famous when he was played by Robin Williams in the movie Good Morning Vietnam has died. Fox's Tanya J. Powers has more.
The name Adrian Cronauer is synonymous with one movie line.
Good morning, Vietnam!
Cronauer, played by Robin Williams in the 1987 film, died yesterday after a long illness. He opened his Armed Forces radio show with that famous line and told me in a 2014 interview that the movie character was loosely based on his service in the Air Force in Saigon in the mid-60s.
If I had done half the things that Robin did in that film, I'd still be in Leavenworth instead of Southwest Virginia. There's a lot of Hollywood exaggeration and outright imagination. But that's okay. I don't mind.
He eventually went into law and later served as an advisor in the Pentagon. Adrian Cronauer was 79. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
And it's not fake news. The Brady Bunch house is for sale. CBS News says the iconic house that belonged to the Brady Bunch is now on the market, and buyers that want to own a bit of nostalgia can purchase it for the low, low price of nearly $1.9 million. The 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in the Studio City neighborhood is located along the L.A. River. It was used in the opening and closing shots of the classic sitcom, which ran on television from 1969 to 1974. The rest of the Brady Bunch was filmed in a Los Angeles studio, so the famously blended family didn't actually live inside the house, but its exterior has become so famous it even has its own Yelp page. No word yet on whether Alice or Cousin Oliver will make an offer. That is American Family News for this hour. For more news and information, visit onenewsnow.com.
I'm Will Addison, Director of Urban Family Talk. We desire to be a movement of time tellers. In 1 Chronicles 12:32 it says, the sons of Issachar were men who had understanding of the time, to know what Israel ought to do. In these perilous times, God is raising up a people of discernment who will see, pray, and act. We sound the alarm as watchmen. We cry aloud that God's people may be activated for his service. Join the movement at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
As far as hacking, I think it was Russia, but I think we also get hacked by other countries and other people. And I can say that, you know, when we lost 22 million names and everything else that was hacked recently, they didn't make a big deal out of that. That was something that was extraordinary. That was probably China. We have much hacking going on. Well, I think it was Russia, and I think it could have been other people in other countries. Could have been a lot of people interfered. I think it was Russia, but I think it was probably other people and or countries. It was Russia, and I think it was probably others also. Well, the Russians had no impact on our votes whatsoever, but certainly there was meddling, and probably there was meddling from other countries and maybe other individuals.
So that's a montage played by Fox and Friends this morning of the president on numerous occasions blaming the Russians. This idea that he doesn't think they had anything to do with it. Well, I mean, you have to listen to what he says, obviously. He has contradicted himself a bit, but so did President Obama. So if you didn't care when President Obama contradicted himself, then why do you care so much when Donald Trump is doing it? Oh, yeah, because you have Trump derangement syndrome. That's why. So I want to finish. I think it's important that we get the rest of the information out on the topic we were discussing just before the break. And oh man, this is so hard because in some ways, especially if you're really informed, if you have all the facts at your disposal, the tendency is guilty as charged. You want to just beat the person down with the facts. So they start spouting off some MSNBC talking points that are completely inaccurate. And you say, well, you know, Federal Bureau of blah, blah, blah says yada, yada, yada. Government statistics show yada, yada. And you just start reeling off the information that you know. Facts and information aren't the only things that people rely on when they hold a view. In fact, if you really listen to what the Democrats talk about, they talk about their feelings a lot. And they come from a place of knowing that they are morally superior than everyone else. And so even when their ideas don't work, the whole thing is, but I come from the right place. You're a greedy capitalist and also a bigot and a racist. I am someone who loves people and cares deeply for them, and my positions support that. That is where they're coming from. So if you understand that, then you can then kind of deal with the rest of it, which is a bunch of information that isn't true. So let's get back into this just a little bit more here to share with you. And then you can take it. And what I recommend above all of this, because you can be as informed as you want to be, but if you have a spirit of kind of anger and dissension, it's not going to get anywhere. And some people are picking fights with you about politics that are close to you because they just can't stand your position. So they're not looking for you to give them information to change their mind. They want you to understand their disdain for your position. They want to use their relationship with you to make you change your mind. And I find this, it's kind of like a fascinating thing because there's a huge difference between the way liberals and the way conservatives approach it. I know so many people who are conservatives who are perfectly willing and are able to maintain friendships with people who are liberals without bringing up politics, without ever trying to convert them or convince them that they're wrong. But with liberals, they have to find a way to get a dig in. Oh, because, that's what you believe. Or, yeah, because, you're a Bible thumper and, you think everyone should do what you do because you're a Christian. It's little digs like that let you know that they're not okay with you not agreeing with them. It's like a personal insult. Whereas with me, I encounter liberals all the time. And if they don't agree, I'm not personally insulted, nor do I feel the need to convert them. They could be converted. And if they wanted information so that they could come to the same place of agreement that I reside in on an issue, and they ask me for information, I'm willing to share it. If they ask me for sources, I'm willing to, here's a bunch of links, or here's the book that I read on that changed my mind. You might want to read it yourself, but that's never enough. What I find when someone opens a conversation up like that, well, I want to know why you believe so-and-so. Then at the end, they just end with insults. Well, you're just a Christian, and you think that everyone should believe like you do because you're a Christian, and you want to impose your theology on everyone else. When I said none of those things and the reasons why I believe what I believe. So this is a hard place because when you're coming from, you honestly want to share facts and information so that the person can make up their own mind, and the other person just wants to insult you. That's not a conversation that's worth your time to have. So we all know that government plays a role in the work of God's kingdom here on earth. Good government encourages an environment conducive for people to live together peacefully. Bad government fosters unrest and instability. But because of sin and the fact that people are involved in all government, you're going to have government used for illegitimate means at times by people who are sinning, right? So in the face of that, you will often see righteous individuals who are concerned with adherence to the law will rise up and reassert their influence to promote good government and restrain evil. And this has happened over and over again in the course of the history of this country and worldwide, where you see evil rise up and then you see others come in and tamp it down and beat it back and bring justice to the fore. So there's an author named Alvin Schmidt who wrote a book called How Christianity Changed the World. And the book documents Christian influence in government, including outlawing infanticide outlawing child abandonment, outlawing gladiatorial games in ancient Rome, ending the practice of human sacrifice in European cultures, banning pedophilia and polygamy, prohibiting the burning of widows in India. William Wilberforce, who was a committed Christian, was the force behind the successful effort to abolish the slave trade in England. And in the United States, 2/3 of abolitionists were Christian pastors. In the 1960s, you had Martin Luther King Jr., who was a Christian pastor, who helped to lead the civil rights movement against racial segregation and discrimination. So time and time again in history, you'll see Christians empowered by God, called to do a good work, who then bring about a radical change in society that benefits everyone and is enshrined into law by government. So we should work through civil authorities for the advancement of justice and the human good. And we should be vocational leaders. We should be civic leaders. We should be volunteers. We should be working in our communities. And in the personal, private relationships, I've evolved, if you will. I hate it when people say that, but it's kind of appropriate. I used to feel like it was, fire and the sword of truth. Rage kitty for Jesus. You come at me with some lies, and I'm going to disinfect it with the truth. And I've come to realize, by getting older, obviously, and by observing some other people who know how to deal with this well, that if I know the place that I'm operating from is one of correctness and truth, and I believe in what I'm sharing, and I believe that that I've prayed over the position, and that this is where God has me, and I'm in agreement with my husband, and I've read and researched, then there's no need for me to be angry. There's no need for me to allow someone else to provoke me into anger about these topics. And I'm serious. I've evolved on this. I used to get ticked and, let people have it. Now I don't. It doesn't mean I'm perfect on it. It doesn't mean people don't still irk me, but I do see a place where God has called us as Christians. If you are informed and you know where you're coming from, and you've prayed over it, and you've got the comfort of knowing that God has not told you otherwise, then you don't have to be angry. In fact, the more calm you are, it's like 50% of the people will view your calmness, it's an insult to them, and it makes them more angry, and they get really vigorous, and they put their finger in your face, and they'll get in your personal space because they need to provoke a reaction from you, because without that reaction, they can't feel like they've validly engaged you. And why aren't you emotional? My goodness, you're a horrible person. You're a bigot. You're a racist. What's wrong with you? And then the other half of the people will rightly see your calm demeanor and your fact giving and the fact that you're not easily provoked as something that requires investigation. And it's those people who will actually hear you say, I found this on this website. And they may go there, and then they may go straight to Think Progress and, completely obliterate any facts that they learned by, all the misinformation over there, and it didn't do any good. But there have been people, it doesn't happen a ton. This is the thing. You want to think, oh, I've had, thousands of people who said they've heard me and they've changed their minds. That's not the case. But I have had people reach out to me in email and say, I heard you talking about this book, and I think you're funny, and that's why I listen to your show, but I disagree with you like all the time. I've had people call in and say that. And so I read the book, and at first couple chapters, I was just mad. And I said to myself, I don't have to read this. It's not like she's going to know, but I did. And then they go on with a few paragraphs of their it's the personal history for them that brought them to their previous belief. They've read the book now, and now they're talking to people and kind of getting some input from people that they respect. And now they're changing their mind on something. And it's so amazing because it's not you feel like you're just expounding on something and you're giving these resources and it's just going so well. And that can change people's minds. But other times it's just that they hear something of interest that they then want to go investigate for themselves, because that's how I became a conservative. It wasn't that someone told me, you're wrong, you're a horrible person, you believe that abortion is something that should be the law of the land. What's wrong with you? That's not it at all. I was listening to Christian radio, and I heard him contrasting what the Bible says with what a politician was saying. And I was like, oh, that has to be wrong. So I got my Bible out. And then I was like, well, but is this applicable? It was a struggle. And I came to the place where I am now politically on my own. It wasn't anybody dragging me, kicking and screaming, or insulting me into this position. So we have to be calm. We have to be wise. We have to remember, so, Christians can come in all political stripes, that anyone who's a Christian that you're fighting with over politics, this is someone you're going to spend eternity with. So what are you going to do? Like find the opposite corner of heaven and hope never to bump into them? Or is it that you hope that, arguing and fighting will change their mind? It's very unlikely that arguing and fighting will change their mind. But I will say that if we can find a way to calmly share, and we have to be asking the Lord, when I come to this person again, this is a person who is constantly attacking me on politics. Lord, what do you want me to say? We're not looking for an audible response. We know the Lord will, he'll let us know what it is that he thinks we should say if it's nothing at all, and then go from there. This is the hardest way to do it. It is. It's the hardest way because more often than not, I'm just trying to prepare you, you're going to get insulted. I don't mean you're going to hear someone say something and become insulted because you have a spirit of offense. I mean, you are going to be called an Uncle Tom. You're going to get memes that say you're raccoon dancing for white people. If you're white, you're going to be told you're a racist and a bigot and you probably want to own people as slaves. You're going to be called everything but a child of God, maligned, and possibly talked about behind your back. And you'll have other people who had nothing to do with the original conversation give you a chilly reception when they see you next, because they've all been told on a chat group that you're the most terrible person in the world because they just found out she's a Trump supporter. He supports Donald Trump. And so you have to be prepared for that too. You have to ask the Lord to give you grace and understanding and peace to be able to walk through that as well. But we know if you're anywhere close to where I am right now on this thing, you know that there are certain people who they're in your life, but they're not your inner circle. They're not your support system. And you may be walking something out that they're seeing, or they may be walking out something that you need to see. There's some interaction that needs to be had, but it doesn't mean every person is your closest best friend. And every person understands where you're coming from, and everything, every person doesn't serve that purpose. Some people just aren't meant to be in close communication with you, and they'll make that obvious, and you'll be able to see that. But for those that are your family members, the onus is on us. When you know more, you do more. When you have a lot, when you've been given a lot of knowledge and understanding and wisdom, you have a lot more responsibility. So I just encourage you to pray about what God would have you to do, what he would have you to say, if you're to say anything, or if you're just to kind of declare a moratorium and just say, I love you so much I can't discuss politics with you because I don't want to fight. I just want you to feel free to believe what you want to believe because we're Americans, and the same for me, and for us to go on in our relationship without the politics. That's one way. But pray over all of it. God will show you what the specifics are for your situation. And we'll talk about this again. We'll circle back around to this again as we get closer and closer into the political season. We'll have Phillip Nelson, PhD, author, with us right after these messages. Stay there.
People often ask me, Tim, what's your favorite part of the Holy Land Tour? I've been leading Holy Land Tours for many years now. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. I learned how to lead these Israel tours from my dad, who started doing them in the 60s. And then he taught me in the 80s and 90s. And now my wife Allison and I lead these tours annually to Israel. And we love going because we love seeing people's eyes when they see things such as the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River and the Garden Tomb and the Wailing Wall. See all these things for the first time, and maybe the last time in many folks' lives, because this is a bucket list trip. We're going to be going in March. If you want a brochure sent to your mailbox, give us a call at 800-FAMILIES, 800-FAMILIES, option 5, and we'll send you a brochure. If you want to go to the website, everything's there, twholyland.com, twholyland.com.
Hello, this is Bishop Harry Jackson of Hope Christian Church in Beltsville, Maryland. Jesus said you would do greater works than he did. 3 places you got to go. That if you go to those places emotionally, not physically, They, Elijah and Elisha, went there physically. But you and I have to go there emotionally and spiritually. If we'll go emotionally and spiritually where they went physically, we'll come into the truths and the transforming and transferring of the mantle that happened with Elisha will happen with us in our generation. Number one, they went to Gilgal. The name Gilgal means rolling away. It's a place where Israel was circumcised the first time in the promised land after 40 years of wilderness wandering. Young people were circumcised there, and they rolled away the shame of their 40 years of wandering. For every Christian leader that becomes great in the sight of the Lord, he has got to recognize that his weakness, his sin in times past, his origins, where he came up from, the limitations of his own natural abilities, all those things that may cause him shame because of natural identification have to be rolled away and paid no attention to in this hour of visitation where God will be glorified. Join us this Sunday morning at 6251 Amandale Road in Beltsville or on the web at thehopeconnection.org.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right, here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Head over to urbanfamilytalk.com and register for our conference. It's August 17th and 18th. It's on marriage and family. It's going to be awesome. Lots of great speakers lined up for you. And, of course, we'll get to meet. So that'll be really fun if you are in Tupelo or if you would like to travel down and get the hotel. It's a nice town. It's we live in St. Louis metropolitan area, so we're a mid-sized city, number 22 or 23 on radio markets. And so it's, you know, it's kind of like a city here. We don't live in the city, but we have a downtown, and then we have like a secondary downtown, and then we have the suburbs. And from what I've seen of Tupelo, it's very much like a town with a few suburban areas around it. And of course they have mall and they have shopping and all the other stuff that you would normally have. But it's also kind of a more small town feel. It's really, it's a cool town. So I recommend it. If you are looking around and thinking, I don't know, August 17th and 18th, come on down. Come listen to the content we're going to put on. It's a quick 2 days, one night. You could literally come on Friday, stay overnight till Saturday, and then be zipping off back to wherever you come from, and you will have gotten this great content that will enrich you and bless you. And we're just so glad to see you there. So think about that. Join us at urbanfamilytalk.com. You can register for the conference. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome Phillip Nelson, PhD, author, and just all-around great guy. Thank you so much for being on today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's talk about Good Intentions, Bad Consequences.com, the latest book. You have Good Intentions, Bad Consequences, Voter Information Problems.
All right. Voter decision-making is different in a fundamental way than the kinds of decisions that we ordinarily make. The problem is that a voter is voting at the same time that thousands of other people are voting. And so the impact of his vote on the results of an election are minimal. And so that does not justify either the Voting Act itself or what one votes about. The crucial feature of my book is that people's votes are largely an extension of their conversations. And one of the things they talk about is indeed their self-interest, especially if they're talking to other people with the same self-interest. coal miners talk about what's good for coal miners. But in addition, people tend to talk about what they think is good for whoever they regard as good, either the nation, the world, or the state, or the community. And it's possible to specify in a way what they talk about, what they want when they are talking about what they think is good. Partly it's a rationalization of their own self-interest. Coal miners are also going to talk about what they think are the virtues of coal mining as far as the world is concerned. But in addition to that, people are going to talk about what they think is good in a broader sense, not necessarily affected by their own self-interest. Now, this is particularly true of university professors. They are actually paid, especially if they're in the social sciences, to talk about what they feel is good. And that sounds great. It's a marvelous virtue to talk about what they consider is good. But unfortunately, they are confronted with something called confirmation bias. They tend to think what is good is what they previously have thought is good, and they tried only to look at the things that justify these previous positions. And now this is true for both people, for both liberals and conservatives. But conservatives are more interested in their own self-interest, not in the sense that others are not going to regard these self-interested positions as necessarily good for the world. And the things that people regard as good for their nation are sort of indicated by what they give to charities. They want a more equal distribution of income, and they want what they consider to be a good environment. And the trouble with that is that this desire is not, they don't look at the consequences of what they are actually advocating, because many of these consequences are unfortunate for their position. For example, those who opt for greater equality do not look at the side effects, what that does to total income. And they also tend to exaggerate the problem, or at least the problem as attributed to the present system. They do not look, for example, when they're talking about more equality for the blacks, they do not look at the sources of that inequality, the fact that they have less education, the fact that they have higher single motherhoods, all those things have serious effects on the present income that blacks get, but they are totally ignored by most of the liberals advocating greater equality for the blacks. Or they attribute those things to capitalism, which is totally unjustified in terms of the things that actually produce these unfortunate side effects of greater equality.
Of course. So I have a just.
I'm sorry. Can you talk a little louder?
Sure. So I have a question about a part of the blurb that you have for the book is...
I can barely hear you.
You're saying that you have a conservative's innovative guide to understanding voter behavior. So what is innovative about the book as a guide as it pertains to how we should behave voter-wise?
Well, in the fact that voters are not going to vote in terms of the consequences because directly in terms of the consequences is something that is fairly well known in the literature. But what is not known, what has not been examined, is exactly what that produces in terms of political behavior. On the one hand, you have people who are dominated by this desire to be good, a desire colored by confirmation bias where they don't actually look at the consequences. And on the other hand, you have people who are operating in terms of their self-interest, and this is usually condemned because any person's self-interest sort of messes up or dominates in terms of what they view as good. And so that can result in some very unfortunate effects. But when you're talking about voting in general, is going to be aggregate self-interest. The interest in terms, these interests are going to be aggregated, and so you get the aggregate self-interest of people with respect to many of the issues that confront voters. In particular, the general redistribution of income, which hurts if it's done too much, seriously hurts total income. And one of the big differences between people voting in terms of greater equality as compared to charitable contributions that lead to that effect is that charitable contributions are constrained. People are not going to give all that much for that cause because it's out of their own pocket. But the advocates, the voting advocates for greater equality, are not really suffering from that because of the large group problem. And so you don't really have any serious constraints on how much they're actually going to vote for greater redistribution. And because of the confirmation vote bias, they tend to vote too much for that. So that when confronted with information about what these side effects are, they tend to be less supportive of greater government efforts to produce greater equality. And these are all sort of features of behavior in bits and pieces have been in the literature, but have not been organized around what the ultimate consequences are for democratic decision-making. You have colleges dominantly talking about greater equality. They argue, I mean, again, their sort of motto about this is race, class, gender, all of which, and their conclusion is that all of this should be remedied for greater redistribution. And this is an effect that is not attributable to the greater knowledge that college professors provide. They do provide a great deal of knowledge in a lot of areas, but not in this question of whether we should be more liberal or conservative. And they really dominate in a way in the electoral process far more than their numbers justify, because people are actually influenced by what professors say. College towns are definitely liberal. People who've been to college tend to be liberal. In the last election, they were sort of almost the dominant group in supporting Clinton. And this produces unfortunate results. And I think the only remedy for that is somehow making colleges more aware of these unfortunate side effects that are produced by what they espouse.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's something that really needs to happen.
Is having, I'm sorry,
Miss.
saying something?
Yes. We're getting close to the end of the program, and I wanted to give out, or the end of this segment. I want to give out your website, goodintentions-badconsequences.com. Fascinating research that you've done, and I encourage people to get the book and check it out. Go to the website and read up more on what you're sharing here. One of the things that we have to do is to acknowledge that these truths about liberalism exist and that it is rampant in our higher education system. And because of that, we have to be really wise about where we send our kids to college and how we interact with them once they're in those environments. Thank you so much for joining the show today. Phillip Nelson, PhD, author of Good Intentions, Bad Consequences, Voter Information Problems. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right. Good to talk to you. So we have a couple of cuts that we missed, and I think we have just a minute left. I'm not sure if we have time to listen to cut 8. I don't know if we have time for that. What we'll do is we'll catch up on those in the next segment. And I think one of the things that's happened is, so there has been a prevailing wisdom that Christians shouldn't be in politics. And we have, 30 some odd million Christians, professing Christians, who also have said in polls and surveys over and over and over again that they don't vote. And it's because people say, well, I want to be in the world, but not of the world. But the way to combat what we see going on in our culture is to participate. And when we don't, we have things to deal with, like what's happening now, where liberals control all of academia. They've worked so hard at it. And while they were working at it, we were building companies and building families and participating in prosperity and building wealth and whatever else we were doing. And none of those things are wrong. But if you're not voting and if you're not paying attention to where your tax dollars are going and what they're supporting and what's being taught on college campuses, then you're building wealth for somebody else to take from you and give to someone else, which is what's currently happening. So we got to do better. Right now, we're going to go to the break. When we get back, I'll have the audio clips for you and also your calls. Stay right there.
This is Uncommon Moments. Here's former Super Bowl winning NFL coach Tony Dungy and his wife Lauren sharing from their book Uncommon Marriage.
Marriage is like playing football. From the opening kickoff, you start off with adrenaline, but by the end of the game, you're exhausted.
Marriage is the same way. You begin your first few years of life together with excitement. Then, years later, you realize you don't have enough adrenaline to keep your marriage at that intense level that you first began with.
Marriages go through stages. What's important is to let your spouse know that you are committed to them for life and that you love them more than anyone else in the world.
You should also lean on Philippians 4, 6, and 7. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything and tell God your needs.
Tony and Lauren Dungy, authors of Uncommon Marriage, learning about lasting love and overcoming life's obstacles together. Discover more at CoachDungy.com.
Listen to Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp.
I mean, did you hear that?
Pointed.
Remember that you're not only a Christian on Sunday.
And insightful.
Deception and lies have been accepted as the norm from the Democrats.
But most of all, she's on the right.
That scripture from the Bible, it says the heart of the fool inclines to the left, just kept popping into my mind.
Stacy on the Right. Now heard weekday afternoons from 2 to 4 Central on Urban Family Talk. Abraham Hamilton III.
God put us in this world at this time to be salt and light. We don't fold because of the darkness that we're facing. This is not the first time in the world's history that it's gotten dark. God has called you and I to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment.
Tune in to the Hamilton Corner, weekdays at 5 p.m. Central on Urban Family Talk.
Hi, this is Steve Tiber with 8 Days of Hope. We've been all over the country helping disaster victims who lose everything.
It's truly a blessing. I really don't have the words to express.
And yet they see a glimmer of hope when a volunteer shows up.
Building the home, that's the second reason we're here. The number one reason is to share the gospel and give them hope.
It's everything that's right in America. I mean, it really represents the best that we have to offer.
That's one of the main reasons for doing it, is being able to be the hands and feet of Jesus and coming out and working with so many wonderful volunteers.
I just feel like it's important in this day and age to teach a child how to serve.
Please go to our website, 8daysofhope.com, and click on Get Involved. Submit your email address, and the next time we go anywhere with a disaster, we'll invite you to come along as well.
I love coming in the job room because you can see these pieces of paper. They aren't just a piece of paper. Right. It's a family that's hurting, and it's a gospel opportunity.
You know, I just thank God, for this moment. I mean, I'll be back in my home, and I know it's going to be awesome.
Come love others with 8 Days of Hope.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Now Chicago's the latest town in America talking about, hey, let's just provide universal basic income. It's a plan that's been tried before. Stockton, California wants to do it. Essentially, it's free money. It's oxymoronic. They tried it in Finland. It failed. How do you give people money? And this is a democratic idea. How do you give people money, Capri, and then think that they'll say, okay, I'm going to go to work now?
Well, look, I mean, this $500 is not necessarily, I think it's a $500 stipend. I think it's a bad idea, to be honest. I mean, I don't think that it is, where we want to invest our money, where we want to invest our tax dollars. If you're going to give somebody $500 a month, make sure that they're spending it on something like childcare. Make sure that they're spending it on something like some kind of a training or even being able to access, transportation to be able to get to work, which is sometimes a barrier to be able to, get or maintain employment. I don't think it's a good idea, but I may be in the minority of Democrats.
I think DeRoy likes it, though.
You know me, I'm Mr. Big Government Programs. I think the best way to help people with low incomes is through economic growth. We now have the record low black unemployment, record low Hispanic unemployment. The female adult unemployment is the lowest level since 1953 under Eisenhower. So more tax cuts, more deregulation, more economic growth, and these things will take care of themselves.
Also, the pride of working is you can't put a mathematical number on it. Thank you both very much.
Well, so welcome back to the show. That was Making Money with Charles Payne. And he was chatting with a couple of, conservative and a Democrat about this idea that somehow we need to start providing a universal income. That means everyone gets a check from the government for a certain amount of money, no matter if they work or not. Do you know what that is? That's basically saying, because we have a progressive tax system, that people who've worked and made great choices and gotten an education and then saved and scrimped and maybe, not gone to the movies, not gone on vacations, not done this, not done that, so they could put their money and their resources into their education, or they've not gone on those different things because they work their way up. And the idea that everyone who's earning a good living is doing so because they're white, they're a member of the patriarchy, someone gave them a hand up or installed them into a place. I don't know any people like that. I mean, I have met so many successful people, and it's almost a game for me to kind of it's not interview style. It's not like I come out and say, I want to know how you made all that money. It's nothing like that. I'm genuinely interested in the person, but as you get to know them, or if they share, often they'll tell you, oh, I worked my way through this, or I worked my way through that. I graduated from college and, I worked my way through college. Some of them, their parents paid for them to go to college, but you still have to go to college no matter who's paying for it. You got to study. You got to earn the grades. You got to take the test. You have to show up and you have to finish. that's the whole game with college, is they add in a whole bunch of stuff that you don't really need to do your career field. And you have to take those classes too and pass them. And then you have to graduate. You have to meet the graduation requirements, which are an ever-changing nebulous type of a thing for some people. And for other people who go for the sciences and the maths, it's pretty simple. It's just how many classes can I take per year for so many years until I complete all of these classes and I graduate? And how do I pay for it? And so for people who make their way the other way, the sweat of their brow, ingenuity of their mind way, where they didn't go to college, but they had an idea and they saw it through, just watch any of these shows about people pitching, the Shark Tank and those programs like that, or these programs where, sorry, I don't watch them a lot, like the cooking shows where it's a restaurant and someone comes in and tells them what they're doing wrong so their business can flourish, because they have so much profanity on them. But I got to say, the ones I have watched, it is a real feat. It's a Herculean feat to run a business, because you got so many variables. Besides the fact that you have to actually be there, basically it's your baby 24 hours a day for the first almost 2 years. And you have to be there for everything, because you don't know who you can trust, and you're hiring people and you're installing people and you're starting up all these systems, and systems take time to become habits. But you've got the unknown variable, which is people. People who work in retail and food service have the worst attendance rates out of any other industry there is. So any person who wants to have a staff of, say, 15 for a restaurant has to really hire between 20 and 23 people to make sure they have a operational staff of 15, because they have a huge number of those people, like a third of them, who will not be reliable in their attendance. And I mean, you tell me how it works when you have a restaurant that's packed to the gills, your chef's cooking and slinging pots and pans and turning out all the recipes, but you don't have anybody to serve them. So you got yourself, your husband, and any kids that are tall enough to hold a tray, bringing things out of the kitchen. And things happen. Even the best employees get sick, have something happen in their family, have a sick child, have something that they need to take care of, and they can't be there 24/7. So when you meet people who've made it and they're earning a good living, and you look at them and you're like, they don't deserve all that. How'd they get 400 acres? Or, I've met so many people, they'll tell me, oh, we're going out to this. And sometimes it's shocking, the kinds of resources that people have, that you just bump into them and you learn they own a 400-acre farm, like an hour away from where you actually live. So they live in that house and they have a 400-acre farm, and they're, currently refurbishing something on that property. And they own another, they own something in Florida with, you don't know how they came by it. You don't know what they did to work and earn it. And the flesh will rise up and say, they didn't deserve that. They should be helping to pay for other people who don't have anything. And that's nothing but the devil talking. You never know how much they're giving philanthropically. You don't know if they're good tithers or not. And it's really none of your business. But we've allowed certain loud voices in this country to convince us that it is our job to make sure that whether people are working or not, because the Bible says if you don't work, you don't eat, that people are going to eat anyway. And I'm not against a social safety net for our country, but it's gotten out of hand. And that's what our guest from last segment was talking about. Dr. Nelson was really expounding upon this idea that you can just look at a person and their circumstances and say, they deserve more than that. And then to look at someone else and say, you have too much, you give something to that person over there. And so he expounded on it. When you're talking about charity, you look at your bottom line and you say, this is how much money we have after we've paid all our bills and taken a vacation and bought clothes and cowgirl boots. We have this much left. So we'll give some of that to charity. And you have other people who say, wow, I came into a windfall. I'm going to give off the top this percentage to charity. Everybody has their own way of figuring it out. But when it's a finite resource, you're like, this is all we can give. And then you have everybody who, when they're giving and it's from the pot of taxes, which is a never-ending amount of money that the legislators can just tweak this number and that number, and instantly $1 billion appears in the Treasury. Because when you're talking about taxing hundreds of millions of people, a penny will do it. A percentage of 1% will do it. 0.5% will do it. It'll net you millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars on the state level, billions of dollars on the federal level. And so then people feel a lot more generous. Well, I've had people say to me, well, the thing is 39% isn't enough. I'm like, how much do you pay? I pay a lot in taxes and I enjoy it. But do you pay 39%? That's not the point. They never want to tell you how much they pay. Like, well, 39%, You may think that sounds reasonable, but that's only the federal portion. What about their state and local taxes? That means that person's paying more than 51 cents on the dollar in tax. And when you say that, will stop for a second. They'll say, but they can afford it. 51% of $5 million means you still have $2.5 million left. But is that the point? If you earned $5 million, who am I to say that you shouldn't keep most of it? Who am I to say you should keep less than half of that because $5 million is a lot? $5 million may be a lot to me. I mean, it is. It's a lot. But is it my job to say it's a lot for you? So these are conversations we're having because we've dumbed down our educational system and we've taken the Bible out of it. What we're talking about is covetousness, where you want to take what your neighbor has and there's no good reason for it. And I think that's the most telling part of it is liberals used to say, well, it's for the poor, it's for this. Now they just say you're evil because you have too much. Too much from a person who has air conditioning and a dishwasher, machines that do your work. Too much. You think that person has too much. We Americans actually have quite a bit. I mean, even compared to our Western nation cohorts in Europe, we have far more square footage in our homes than they do. We have more appliances that do our work on a daily basis. We use more water. We use more electricity. Europeans, that's why they say to us, you need to get in the Paris Climate Accord so you can transfer some of that wealth over to other nations that don't have as much as you because you're using too much. You have too much square footage. Your cars are too large. You use too much gas. You have too much. Really? Who are you to say that to me? You don't even live over here. You're not even a part of this country. This is a problem that we have. It's a huge problem that we have. So I agree, the universal basic income, it's a crock of malarkey. It's no good. And anytime you hear people talking about that, understand they're just trying to get to communism in a roundabout way. They're just trying to get there. Now, I want to go back. When we came into the show, we were listening to Lieberman, and he's a Democrat, but he caucuses with the Democrats as an independent. And he was talking about Ocasio-Cortez, and this all ties together because it's socialism. Ocasio-Cortez, the new face of the Democratic Party, is advocating for socialism, a universal income, universal health care, the ownership of the means of production by government, voted in by the people, et cetera, et cetera. He says, what is the Democratic Party going to be? Socialists cannot win in general and national elections with candidates like Ocasio-Cortez. It's number 8.
You're asking a lot of important questions. So I'd say that there are certain policies that may win in some districts like this one in a Democratic primary, but they're not going to win in a general election statewide, certainly not in our national election for president. So if the victory of Ms. Ocasio-Cortez is in Bronx and Queens is taken as the direction in which the Democratic Party should go nationally, the Democratic Party is not going to elect a president in 2020.
And he's right, because what ends up happening is you have a lot of voters out there who are quite honestly very disaffected. They're not the voters who don't vote at all. They're not people who don't vote, but they are sick to death of the rancor and the constant din of politics. They want to know information and news that will help them accomplish their goals, help them raise their families, help them get closer to God, help them maybe learn a new skill or something that they can incorporate into their home business or things they're doing at their house. They have so many other interests, and they have families and everything that goes along with that. So what they do is they wait until it's absolutely necessary to buff up on the issues, usually right after the primary. They don't vote in the primary. They just come in hot right after that. They start looking around, they go to their websites that they trust. And as they begin to poke around and check out what's going on, they come to understand that while they were away doing life, the Democrats have moved even farther to the left. And when they hear socialism, these are people who, as disaffected as they may be politically, they still remember their civics lessons about how socialism leads to communism and is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of millions of people and is the reason Venezuela is on fire and starving to death simultaneously right now. They know that. So they look at that and they're like, I can't do that. Because Bernie Sanders was burning up the campaign trail in certain states, liberal hotbeds, but nationally, the Democrats knew they could not have him as the nominee. Everyone kept saying, Bernie Sanders will win. Yeah, he would have won the millennials' would have voted for him, a bunch of them, but he wasn't going to win people who understand what socialism is, people who listen to him. If you ever listen to one of his 30-minute interviews on universal health care, where he admits that universal health care doesn't work in Great Britain and it doesn't work the way it's intended in Canada, but those are experiments. It would work in America because we would make it work. If you've ever heard that audio, you know this is a man who is not only peddling untested ideas and things that are absolutely unworkable, but that he doesn't even take the time to try to figure out how something that works on a tiny island nation like Great Britain and works poorly there, or how there's a tiered medical system in Canada where everybody who can't afford any better is on universal health care and it's horrible. And then everyone who has enough money has private health care that they pay for out of their pocket, even though they're taxed to pay for the universal health care. And then there's the ones who fall through the cracks who don't really have anything. They have universal health care, but they don't really access it. They're living below the poverty line. He wants to take countries that have not even a third of the number of people that we have, not even a tenth of our land mass, and compare us to them and say we should do what they're doing. Instead of just packing up and moving to Great Britain or Canada, they'd be happy to have him. Why doesn't he just move there? Why does he try to bring that garbage over here and force it on the rest of us? So this is what we're looking at. You know, nationally, I couldn't agree more that there's no way the Democrats run some Democratic Socialist light and win the national election, not against Donald Trump. And even as far left as the party has moved and as millennials tend to vote, there's still some common sense operating in this country. And there's still those of us who, the remnant, the Christians, the praying Christians, the ones who, you all have seen that meme, the devil starts shaking when I get out of bed in the morning, not because my feet hit the floor, but because I'm on my knees praying for everything. That's who we have to be. It's not that we're so courageous that we're never afraid, or that we never see what's happening and what's coming down the pike and think, Lord, have mercy. It's that we know the author and finisher of our faith. We have to know that, and then we have to act on it. We have to pray for those who are placed in authority over us. If you're a Christian and you listen to this show and you hate Donald Trump, that hatred is sin. Let it go. Leave it at the feet of the cross and start praying for him. You can't hate someone that you pray for. In the end, that's where the rubber is going to meet the road, my friends. Good night. Have a blessed evening, and I'll be back with you tomorrow.